Hi and welcome to the Jem Hawkes YouTube channel. I hope you're having a fabulous day today. Thanks so much for joining me to create some wire jewellery together today, and what we're going to do for our project is absolute beginner's basics. We're going to take a length of wire and we're going to write a word with it. So for today's love letters tutorial, why don't we head down to the board and take a closer look at what we're going to make together. So what we're going to create together for love letters is just this little section down at the bottom. Now I'm going to be teaching in 1mm or 18 gauge round raw copper wire. Great temper to actually start working with. It's nice and soft and fluid, and once you've got the hang of working in the raw copper, which is quite a soft wire, you can up the gauge, work with heavier wires and also with firmer temper wires. So you could go for a medium temper or a German style wire, or even up that to a stainless steel if you've got very strong fingers, or you could simply go for a raw copper in a heavier gauge. So I'm going to be working in, as I say, 18 gauge, which is 1mm wire, and all I've done with this piece is attached it to a length of chain I had hanging around and just popped an oversized fancy clasp on the back. Now, as ever, I've completely mixed my metals. I've got antiqued copper, brass, silver colour and raw copper down at the base as well. I've even thrown in a couple of gold colour connectors, so all good. Well, let's just move that all the way up to the top so it doesn't get knocked out of the way, and that's what we're going to work towards creating. Now I have around about a 15-inch length of wire to work with today, and considering the word is less than 2 inches from one side to the other, I think that's probably slightly more than we need, but with writing with wire you do tend to use a lot more wire than you think you might. So this is a really super accessible tutorial. What we're going to do is make sure that wire is nice and warm and fluid, especially at the first half, which is where we're going to start working today. So I'm just running that between thumb and forefinger to get a really good fluid feel to that wire. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm working with a lovely soft wire, which is a great place to start. So I'm coming around about 2.5 to 3 inches from the end, and I'm going to put a little bit of an angle. If you were to put that on a straight line, it's probably around about a 45-degree angle. I've just kinked the wire down here, so I'll just give that a quick smooth to make that nice and straight. Now, to make my life slightly easier, this great big long length of wire, I'm just going to run that between thumb and forefinger once and just very, very gently rotate that around in a loose working coil. It just means that it's not going to stab me in the chest as I'm working with you today, which wouldn't be great fun, I think you can agree. So the next tool we're going to use are our round nose pliers. Now, I'm not on commission from Beadlon, but I do recommend them. They're great pliers. So we're going to warm that first 2.5 to 3 inches of wire through to make sure that's nice and soft and fluid to work with. Getting that nice and toasty warm, and then we're going to use those round nose pliers to create the first half of our little heart connector up at the top. So much in the same way as when I do a wrapped loop, I create the first half of that shape with the pliers in one position, and then I'll draw the end of the wire down so that it just touches on that first angle that we made. So we've got a little bit of an extended loop. It's not quite the same as when we make the round form because it's slightly longer. It's more of a teardrop shape at the moment. The next thing we're going to do is use some nice straight pliers. They're flat. When I say straight, I mean they've got flat edges to them. Many apologies. They're my bent chain nose pliers. So I'm going to grip that from underneath so you can see that I'm grabbing hold of that much shorter on this side of the loop shape than it is on this side. And that's because I want to push the tail of the wire back up. So let me just get my thumb out of the way a second and push that up. So you can see we've got that nice angle coming back in the opposite direction now. So if I just rotate that in the light, you'll see it's longer on this side than it is on this side. And what we want to do now is pull that angle and make it nice and sharp, as if it's a racetrack hairpin bend. Let's just flatten that down for a second. And I'm just going to very gently coerce that to close up. Now, in order to stop the short tail of wire sitting up over the top, which is what it will want to do, I'm going to grip those very firmly with my non-dominant hand and just close that loop up. Like so. So that's going back on itself. There is a little bit of a bulge down at the base, and I'm more than happy. I think that looks quite nice. If you want that slightly firmer, you can apply greater pressure, but do be careful that you're supporting very firmly with the non-dominant side. Otherwise what will happen is the shorter side of the wire will likely flip over the top, and we're trying to keep this in 2 dimensions. So I'm just going to give that a quick squish and a squeeze before we grab those round nose pliers again to make the second half of that heart form. So I'm making small movements, and what I'm trying to do is replicate that kind of teardrop shape that we've made on the first side, the first lobe of the heart. And I'm going to draw the tail of wire back down so that it meets at that first angle we created. Now that's a bit of a funny looking heart. I don't know if I'm happy with that, but you can always just move the angle down a little bit if you want it to be slightly larger, and I'll show you how to do that. So basically what's happened here is the racetrack hairpin is a little bit lower than I wanted it to be. So you've got a couple of options. You can just rotate your pliers around and elevate that looped shape so that the heart becomes a better shape for you. If you quite like a large heart, you can move that angle along the wire slightly. So let's just show you how to do that as well. Just take that along a little bit and then put the angle back in slightly further down. Now we've got a much larger heart to work with, but I like the angles and I like the shapes and I like the proportions of this. I'm just going to flip that over and make sure that I get this section of the heart nice and angular where we put that first bend in. So I'm just going to get that nice and flat. I'm not pressing down on anything where the wires cross over. I'm just making sure that everything remains in 2 dimensions. Now what I want to do is grip a hold of the wire as it comes away, the shortest tail possible, and I'm just going to angle that across. And what we're doing is we're just tying a knot in that heart shape so that we've got our connector. Now if you don't want to use a split ring or a jump ring to connect, now would be the time to slide on the piece of chain that you want to work with. So I'll find a scrap of chain over in the pot. She says, desperately trying to find a scrap of chain. Here's one, with a pretty Middle Eastern eye on it. So if you want to add your chain directly into the heart shape, now is the time you would do that. So all you would do is run that down and sit it into position. These are very, very cute little elephants, aren't they? Adorable. So I'm actually going to take that back off, because otherwise what will happen is it will get tangled with the writing that we're going to do, and that's not a problem. You can work around it, but what it will do for me is make it harder for you to see what's happening. So you just leave your chain in position before we do this wrapping of the heart shape. So I'm going to very, very firmly grip onto that heart form so that when I take the tail around the core wire, the wire that's coming away to that great big long tail of wire there, I'm going to rotate that around a couple of times. Now I want this to be quite an elongated wrap, so I'm going to go for, I think, 4.5 maybe. And if that's a little bit loose, you can very gently just tighten that up. It doesn't really matter at this stage which way is front and which way is back, but I'm going to say that this is the front side, so therefore I want to trim the wire so that the cut is only visible from the underside. Now when you're doing writing with wire, there is only one direction to look at it, because if you flip it over, it doesn't actually make a lot of sense. Maybe it says something else. Maybe it says Eva. I don't really know what that says, but you do have a direction. So it does pay to just make sure that you're happy with how things look. I'm going to give that a delicate little squish and make sure it sits down neatly. And then I'm just going to warm that next section of wire through nicely. Now once you get the technique, you can obviously do whatever word you fancy. I'm just going to show you love letters today, because love is all around us, as the song goes, and it's something that you can spread with your smile and with your jewellery too. When you're learning to write with wire, it genuinely does pay to start with something that's simple. So we're going for a reasonably achievable word. There's a little bit of switcheroo when we need to get from one side of the letter to the other, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. But if you practice with a softer wire, you could even go for a 0.8 or 20 gauge wire. Wouldn't wear very well. It would be quite stretchy if you attach chain to either side, but they do make lovely designs to have on the table. You can do people's names in writing with wire. Lots and lots of fun. But do start out making your life easy with a good soft wire, and then you can practice, and then you can move on to firmer wire and harder types of wire, such as that stainless steel, which is a real tricky beast. Let's get back down to the board and carry on with our love letters tutorial. So if you didn't want to have a heart-shaped connector, you could just do a circular form up at the top instead. You can make it quite a small loop, and as I said earlier, you can grab that directly into your chain, or you can allow yourself the opportunity to use some kind of link. So let's smooth and warm the first section of wire we're going to work with today. You can have a couple of different types of L, but I quite like a nice swooshy stylized script L. So I'm putting a very, very gentle curve in the back of the L, just like so. Very, very gentle. If I just put that on the line, you'll see it's just starting to come away ever so slightly. What I'm going to do now is pop a little loop down at the bottom. Now this is probably the most important time because it sets the size of your lettering. So if you make a great big giant L and really teeny tiny O, V and E, it can look a bit unbalanced. So do have a think about how large you want the design to be. And what I'm going to do is just rotate the wire around those pliers. You can go underneath or you can go over the top. At this stage it does not matter one bit. So I've got that loop just at the base of the back of the L, and I'm just going to pull that around until it makes me happy. I quite like that. There's a little bit of a swoop in the backbone of the L, and what we need to do now is start bringing that back up on the base line of the L. So because I've got a looped L, you can be as small or as large as you desire. So what we're going to do now is put an angle in so that we can come up the backbone of that letter O. So what I tend to do is imagine where my L will finish. Now I'm sure that in the rules of Roman lettering there is some magical distance between the top of the L and the switch point as a ratio to how far you go across the base. I'm just going to eyeball it and see what makes me happy. So let's just push the wire back up and over. Now I don't want it to come back up in a straight line as if it's going to 12 o'clock. I do want it to go past that. But to make that angle slightly sharper, I push the wire all the way back over and then pull it back up again. And can you see how it's changed the angle slightly? It's a little bit sharper just at this point down at the base of the L. So I'm going to use my round nose pliers. When I make the letter O, I like to make it oval rather than completely round, but again that's a stylistic choice and you can absolutely choose how that looks and makes you happy. If you're going to make an oval, obviously your round nose pliers can still be utilised. What we're going to do is just allow the wire a little bit of warmth first of all, and I'm just using my thumb here, the curvature of the end of my thumb and my body heat to get that to come around slightly, and then I will refine that with the top with my round nose pliers to get a really nice fluid beginning to that O shape. So I'm just going to make sure that I'm happy with the sizing as I pull the wire back around underneath. Just pull that into position and allow you to see where we are at so far. So my O is quite large compared to my L, but that's, as I say, it's a stylistic choice that you can make as you go along. Love working with raw copper, it's an absolute stunner. So what I'm going to do is just grab a hold of the top of the O shape and just tighten that up slightly. I'm quite happy with how that looks. Then I'm going to put those round nose pliers in at the base and draw the wire quite sharply up. And what we're looking to do with this second pass of wire, the wire that's currently connected to the tail there, is I want it to sit over the top. Let's just flip that. I want it to match the first shape that we made. So I'm going to pinch that with thumb and forefinger and just manually draw that around. If you are struggling with that, don't be afraid to use a form. Now you can get small oval mandrels that will be really helpful with the letter O. I'm just going to show you that you can pinch the wire and just draw that around, and we're looking to get just over. If this oval shape was a clock face, we'd be looking to get to about 2 o'clock. So we're going past, maybe 1:30. We're looking, however, to just recreate the first swoop of wire that created that O shape. If you need to, you can use those round nose pliers again to help you. Whatever works best for you. So once you've got that all the way around, all the way over the top to cover up the first line, when we get to that sort of 1:30-ish area on the oval shape, I'm going to grip the wire from underneath and I'm going to pull that firmly up. Now if I just pull that to begin with, you'll see what's going on, and then I'm going to use my thumb to push that back past where I want it to go, and then again slightly more forwards, back into position. So let's put that down on the board a minute and we'll see we've got low lo and behold, we're working on our love letters design. Now you will have the opportunity to just slightly modify those letters later on. What you don't have the opportunity to change is the basic sizes and dimensions. So do make sure you're happy as you're going through. And what we're going to do now is a simple letter V. Now for me, I'm going to grip underneath so I can show you what's happening. And I'm using very close to the tip of those bent chain nose pliers. Very, very close, because I want a tiny, tiny amount of wire between the end of where we're leaving the letter O and where we're beginning the letter V. It's a script lettering, so it's connected. And I'm going to push that all the way down and back so that it touches the O, and then draw it forwards again. And you may wish to grab that with your pliers so you can retain a very, very straight line. For the letter V, in this instance, to look properly like a letter V, we do want to have some straight lines. So I'm just going to fiddle with that until it sits exactly where I want it to. You might need to put a little bit more heat in it. And then I'm going to squish it in the opposite direction. So my pliers are like this, flat on the wire, and then at 90 degrees to the wire. Give that a squish so I've got a lovely straight line. And then we're going to reach down to the baseline. Now if you wanted to use a straight edge, you absolutely can. I haven't actually got one to hand today, but you're looking to have the base of the letter L, the base of the letter O, meet along an invisible line. You can obviously have a piece of paper with a straight line or use a straight edge ruler if you prefer. And then we're going to switch that V so that it comes back up again. So let's push that up in the opposite direction again. And there you've got the basics of your letter V. Now, in my lettering, in my mind, I want the V to be equal. So I want the angle that comes from the top to the bottom and then to the bottom at the top to be equal. So I don't have a protractor to check my angles. I'm not that fussy, but I do want them to look approximately the same. What I'm going to do though is just grip the wire at the bottom of the letter V, push that over and open it back up again. And in that way we slightly sharpen the base of the letter V. So I'm going to give that a squish so that it's nice and flat, like so. And then again I'm going to try and match the height where we joined the letter V to the height where we leave the letter V by pushing that down. So I'm going to take that further than I need to begin with, just to get a nice sharp angle. Now I don't know if you can see from where you are, it's slightly shorter on the right than it is on the left. So if I made that mistake, let's just push the pliers gently back up a little bit to open up the angle. And then I'm going to draw that back down again. And hopefully you'll be able to see that we've lengthened the second side of the letter V there, so that that now is slightly more symmetrical. So let's just close and open without destroying your beautiful letter O that you've made already. And then let's just close and open those angles until we're absolutely delighted with how that sits. I'm generally quite pleased with how that's looking so far. You can obviously take all the time in the world to make those minor adjustments. Push that wire so that it's coming not quite straight down, but really close to straight down. Now when I'm forming the letter E in Roman lettering, I like the cross member to be around about halfway between the base and the top of the letter. You may have stylistic preferences to that. So I need to grip the wire just above the halfway point between the top and the bottom of your lettering and pull that across. The reason it needs to be above the halfway point is that once you've actually added in the width of the wire itself, it's going to move down, in this instance by a whole millimetre. So if you've got whacking great huge letters, that's not much of a problem. But if you're working with quite small diminutive letters, these are about 8 to 10 millimetres in height, that 1 millimetre can make quite a difference. So I'm just going to grip a hold and make sure that the crossbar, this section of my letter E, is nice and straight. And I'm also going to take the opportunity to just strengthen up the wire on this angle change. Although once you are practiced with writing with wire, you may like to use a heavier gauge. If you're using the same wire as I am right now, which is 1mm 18 gauge, it's quite soft and flexible. Let me pop this down for a second so it can open up slightly. So adding a little bit of strength where those angles change is really, really useful. Let's just pop that back up to the top. So to make the letter E, this is one of my favourite letters to use in letter writing. When you're using wire to write, let's warm warm through that first section. And what we're going to do is, I need to turn it on its side. I'm going to grip that crossbar of the letter E. And what we're going to do is draw the wire strongly upwards, away from the letter, put some lovely heat and warmth in it. So I'm going to show you that in the correct orientation so you can see what that looks like. My E's don't tend to go directly across in a 90-degree. They're ever so slightly elevated, but again, that's your stylistic intention. You can do exactly how you prefer. This is my favourite part of wire writing with wire. So let's get that nice and warm. And I'm going to support the crossbar of the letter E and then just swoop all the way around and draw the wire up and around. So I really enjoy that part because the wire just kind of does it for you. So I'm just going to pull very, very gently on the tail of the wire and just check that my distances are all fairly similar. So the top of and to the bottom of those letters needs to be reasonably close. So if you find that your letter E is a teeny bit tiny, what you can do is just snitch just a little bit of wire extra and then just move that around slightly, and you can elevate the size or you can just make it slightly smaller. So I think I've probably overcompensated and made that just a little bit too large, in which case you can just draw that back down. Always working your wire and warming it before you start using it means that you have a much greater opportunity to fix things if things don't go absolutely perfectly the first time around. So we're almost at the end of our tutorial. We've really just got to finish off with a wrapped heart loop at the other end. I hope you're having as much fun as I am. Let's get back down to that board and just complete this tutorial together. So what we want to do now is just finish off with a second loop, and if you've started with a heart loop, it really is beautiful if you can finish with one. If you started with a round one, maybe match that at the other side. However, the world is your oyster, and you can do that exactly however you please. What I would say is that we're looking to start the bend, whatever shape you're going to form, at the same height as the first one. And then if you are going to attach it to chain, and you don't have to, you can use these on place settings if you want to. You can do whatever wording and lettering you desire, but if you're going to match that, then think about the height, how it's going to hang. So let's grab a hold of our design and take a look at just warming that wire through. And then I'm going to take the wire back over to the top and grip the wire from underneath at the approximate same height from the baseline of the letter L to that angle, and repeat that on the second side. Now with this design, because the letter E doesn't really actually go quite like this, it's a bit of a liberty, but that's fine. I like taking liberties. There we go. So let's bend that all the way over so we get a nice sharp angle, and then draw that back up. And let's just give that a quick straighten. Now I think we should try and aim for the same size heart as we did on the first side. So let's just get those angles looking better. We can adapt that ever so slightly if it doesn't go completely to plan. Grab those round nose pliers and exactly the same way as we did at the beginning. If it's easier for you to put some marker pen on your tools so you know exactly the size, or you can eyeball it like I am now. So let's just rotate the pliers around and then draw that wire down. That's probably just a little bit small. If it's too small, rotate the wires away from you and you can make that larger. If it's too large, rotate the pliers back towards you and then you will make that size ever so slightly smaller. So again, a little bit of warmth into that wire. Draw it back so that it meets the first angle that you've created, and then over halfway up the distance we're going to change that angle back, get my thumb in the way, push that all the way around. Now that looks a little bit small to me, so what I'm going to do is just rotate those pliers like so away from me until that looks a little bit more equal. It's a little bit smaller, but I'm not going to worry about it. You can obviously take a lot more time to fix this than I am going to now. So let's draw that wire all the way across until it almost meets the first lobe of the heart, the first half of the heart. Exactly the same way as we did before. We're going to take a couple of bites with those pliers to smush that into a hairpin bend. Keeping the wire flat so that one does not sit on top of the other, needs to be in 2Ds, and then I'm just going to bring that round so that it sits more centrally above the first angle that we created. If it's rotated too far, let's just open that around a little bit. If I grip that really firmly, we should be able to bring that back into position. As I said, you can take a lot more time than I am to get this perfect. Let's rotate the second half of that heart around, draw the wire across. Now you can see that that's a very funny looking off-centre heart right now. So if that happens to you, what we're going to do is fix that by just bringing the cleavage of the heart more centrally above that connection point. And you can close that up a little bit and re-centralise it as you need to. So once you're happy with how that looks, it's a little bit off-centre, but like I said, I'm not going to worry about it. This is the point at which you would add the other end of the chain in if you're going for a link-free connection, other than the links on your chain, of course. If you're happy with your heart and you've attached your chain into the mix, we're going to support that heart shape without crushing down where one wire crosses over the other. We're just going to support that firmly and then draw that tail of wire around the same number of times as we did on the first side. If that's getting away from you, you can just tighten that up slightly. Once it's tied in, you can take a second to just resit that heart exactly how you want it to. And let's go for another wrap over the front there. That looks pretty similar to me. Like I said, you can take more time to get that to sit perfectly. And then we're going to trim away in the same place. So from this angle, it needs to be trimmed at the back. What I would say is that my looping, my coiling here is just a little bit baggy. So before I make that trim, I'm going to tighten that up. Because if you cut first and then tighten it up, the end will be more visible at the front. And what that will mean is you'll have to take a very, very tiny amount of wire off the end, which isn't always easy. So let's just look twice before we press the cut, and then pop this in the scrap pot for later. It's a little bit beaten up, but I will find a use for it. And then we're just going to tighten up that coil by rotating the pliers around in the same direction that the wire travelled, and give that a very gentle squish to make it sit flat and however you want it. Now you can, if you've got one heart a little bit lower than the other, you can utilise that letter E, so you can create more space by drawing it up like so. Or if it's too low, you can just adjust it. Too high, too low, you've got a little bit of mileage to make changes as you see fit. What I would say is if you have the opportunity to use any flat facing pliers, big wedgy chisel tipped, let me just grab my flat pliers. These were ever so cheap. And just squish down on the flat areas. Now you can see where you've got one layer of wire over the top of another. Please don't squish on that because you'll weaken your wire. But where the wire is a single layer thick, you can apply hardening without a hammer by opening and closing your pliers on the design. So if I grip this first, show you that I'm not going to grip any areas of double layers of wire, only a single layer of wire at a time, you can really make quite a lot of hardness occur. So on the O, it's only the lower extremities that you can squishy squish, and on the L you've got that baseline to squish. You could even squish a tiny bit of that circular form, which would in fact be very helpful, and then you can squish the backbone of that L as well. All of those manoeuvres will strengthen your design, albeit you will still always have that element of springiness. Once you've got to grips with writing the word love with wire, you can change up to a harder wire or a heavier gauge of wire. Whatever makes you happy, you can use them as place holders, place names for your weddings, your wedding favours and the such like. I hope that you've enjoyed that. I know I have. You have yourselves the most beautiful day, and I look forward to seeing you back here in a week's time for more Wire with Jem. Bye for now.